Good to see.
Okay. And now we're going to crank up the presentation, which is down here. Okay, can everybody see this?
No, it's black. Oh, here we are. Okay, got it.
Low system resources may affect your audio quality. Try closing. Hold on a second. Hold on. I'm going to get out of this. And there must be some things that are open that I'm not aware of. Hold on. Yep, here they are.
Things that Marjorie was doing before.
Okay, that got rid of all this stuff. Now we're going to go back to here.
Did you close that window?
I can't.
I think if you click, you can't click on that X.
So we're spending time on music here, in part because love, there's an area of the brain that's been localized, and it's where the intense emotions of love, sexual ecstasy, music, anything you could think of that generates love. And so music, we wanted to have stuff on music. We just couldn't find anything till just recently. So the whole point in this covering music is a different way of expressing love for yourself and for your fellow person. And with that, we're going to go through.
And it's all about vibration.
This guy here wrote this book. We'll just try and follow his book because he's got a lot of interesting ideas on music, but he's written lots of books. This is just, he's written 11 books, including How to Listen to Jazz. So we start at the beginning, and the beginning for him is the Big Bang. That was when everything happened. Now, it just happened that this cosmic background radiation was first identified in 1964. And at the same time, this is when the British invasion of rock and roll was occurring. And people don't realize this, but the Beatles had a string of #1 hits in the middle 60s. In fact, on the first week in April of 1964, the Beatles held 1 through 5 of the top 40 songs. Nobody, to get one song in there is amazing. They had 5 songs, and they were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But right after that, Louis Armstrong came out with this song, Hello Dolly, and he leapfrogged over the Beatles to become #1. And then the Beatles came back, of course. So 1964, it was an interesting year. The Indian spirituality, the world is sound, and Shiva holds a drum at the moment of creation. So, for example, we looked at Kandinsky as a painter. Kandinsky thinks that painting is like music. each of the colors has a different sound for him when he's painting. And maybe other artists have this, I have no idea. The Bible has over 1,000 references to music. And in the beginning, in Genesis, let there be light. Well, this is spoken. This isn't, you know, something that is minor. And of course, in Native American myths, the creator sings things. And then we come down to Pythagoras, who taught his students that a stone is frozen music. So all of these harmonies are captured in a stone. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Music is power, not simply entertainment or a business. Like I said, it excites this one area of your brain. And in the heart of the atom, and Ron Cowan observed this, it's really noisy. These atoms are vibrating at millions, hundreds of millions of times per second. It's really a song, a cosmic song of when you dig into looking at atoms, that they're all vibrating together. There's sound waves that trigger bubbles that collapse with light. This is a phenomenon called sonoluminescence. So it just shows the power of music in creative destruction. Earth, air, water, fire, the crack of thunder, the roar of waves, the crash of a tree or boulder. There you go. Each creature seems to have its own sonic niche in the universe. The Nez Perce listened to reeds in the wind and then made pipes out of them. Trees, bushes, grasses have distinct songs, according to Australian Aborigines. So music is everywhere. The songs of the hunters mimic the sounds of that which is hunted. Sympathetic music to conquer the beast borrow its music. So a turtle hunting song of the Andaman Islanders, or the buffalo dance of the Mandan tribe of the Dakotas, or the elephant hunting music of the Hehe people of Tanzania, or the opossum dance of the Aboriginal settlers of southeastern Australia. So the most persuasive origins of music are based on sex or violence. In hip-hop and in punk rock, ballads and blues, country and metal. The dance music at the disco and the electronic grooves at the rave, and religious music, the oldest song in the Bible, Book of Exodus, taunts the defeated Egyptian army after God has drowned the Israelites' enemies in the Red Sea. And while the Song of Songs couches praise of God in the erotic language of a love poem. So there you have it. Charles Darwin saw sex as the source of all music making. The songs of human societies grew out of mating calls of birds and other creatures. Musical tones and rhythms, he declared, were used by our half-human ancestors during the season of courtship, when animals of all kinds are excited not only by love, but by the strong passions of jealousy, rivalry, and triumph. And love is still the most common theme of songs. I remember looking at the first 20 songs the Beatles wrote, and they're all about love, and they're all targeted at teenage girls, because they're the ones that buy the records back in the day. You'd go out and buy a 45 back then. A survey of 6,000 recent songs found 90% were created by males at the peak of their sexual activity and prowess. And a recent survey of the top 10 most popular Billboard songs show 92% refer to sex, with an average 10 plus reproductive phrases per song. So music is not just life-changing, but life-creating. We have the bird song that conveys control of a territory. Music has as much to do with war as with sex. And singing or listening to song releases oxytocin, making you more trusting and willing to cooperate in teams. So you can have sexual unions or you can have military units that work together. A musical flute constructed from the femur of a bear from a Neanderthal cave appears to be 43,000 years old. So music has been here for quite a long time. And music excites the same area of the brain as sex and drugs, as we said. The lambdoma is something that the Egyptians showed up with. It's a matrix. There's rows and columns, but there are, it's complicated. The net of it is that there's 16 rows and 16 columns. And out of this, they construct a variety of musical scales. They seem to like one musical scale that had 7 primary notes and 8 undertones that weren't as dominant. But we don't know where the Egyptians got this from. It could have come from Atlantis. We don't have a clue. But Pythagoras went to Egypt. He was there in Egypt for 20 years, and he came across this, and he liked the order in this. So he took it back to Greece and ended up using it to construct not out of 16 notes, but out of 12 notes. Our musical scale is 12 notes. And out of that, Pythagoras decided he'd extract 8 of the 12 for different keys. So now we're going to turn to how music is involved in hunting. That's why it's called Carnivores at the Philharmonic. We have a transition from the hunting bow to the musical harp or lyre. The various instruments of the orchestra can be traced back to these primitive origins. Their earliest predecessors are made either from the animal, the horn, the hide, the gut, the bone, or weapons employed in subduing the animal, a stick or a bow. Are we wrong to hear this history of music itself in the formidable aggression and awe-inspiring assertiveness of the monumental symphonies that remain the core repertoire of the world's leading orchestras? Listen to Beethoven, Brahms, Mahler, Bruckner, Berlioz, Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, and they all summon images to bands going out to hunt, to go to battle. So music is right in there. As an aside, in 1985, a 7-Eleven manager discovered that if he played Mozart and Beethoven, that all the vagrants and panhandlers in his parking lot left. So the word got out, and there's now apparently another 150 different 7-Eleven franchises that blast classical music, and there's no vagrancy. Go figure. The law enforcement agencies, transit authorities, and business owners also use it to repel unwanted parties. So when music doesn't create a tribal alliance, it is created by the listeners. In the 1980s, we're startled to learn that these prehistoric images that are in these caves, for example, in Lascaux, which are 20,000 years old, the drawings that are there on the cave walls, that these parts of the caves have the greatest resonance. So when I went there and looked at these things, partly it's the painting is incredible. These are very, very skilled artists that paint a picture of a buffalo, but they end up taking the rock, and they'll want to have an eyeball, so they'll look for a piece of the rock that is kind of scooped in, so that they can sink the eye there into that, and then they look for the haunch of the buffalo as part of the rock as well, and so forth. But I didn't realize that there's this resonance that occurs there when you get close to these things. We know very little about these people. The one thing that's crazy about the Lascaux and other early cave paintings is they don't have any pictures of people. They can clearly draw people because they drew these incredible animals, but each of these caves just has one little stick figure, literally a stick figure with a circle for a head and a spine, and two sticks for arms and two sticks for legs, and that's it. So there's clearly some religious or spiritual issue in this. This Yegor Reznikov, who's an expert in acoustics of European churches, uh, developed a habit of humming when they're in a cathedral or a cave with paintings having the best acoustic resonance, which is near these images. So even in the cathedrals, this is true. Another thing to keep in mind here about the carnivore side, it's partly animal, partly human, and we make up early tales. So there's all kinds of tales of talking deer and lions and dragons and whatever. There are fairy tales there and nursery rhymes and children's songs that all focus on the animals. And to understand the origin of music, therefore, you should become like a little child. The rhythms generate the euphoric emotions, the drums, waterfalls, sunlight. These are basic to music. Now, music is universal, but its meaning may not be. Many myths are universal across the globe. The Great Flood, and in every continent, there's the story of a great flood. 10,000 years ago, who knows? There's the tale of Orpheus, the tale of the trickster. These apparently might have originated 60,000 years ago. Wilhelm Grimm felt that these stories were universal, just like Joseph Campbell picked with these archetypes. So the tale of Orpheus, who played the lyre and convinced Hades to bring his dead wife Eurydice back to life, is shamanic in origin. There's 50 plus Native American tribes that also have this tale. It isn't unique to the Greeks. The Native American tribes had many songs for healing those who were ill. And there's a growing body of knowledge that music, in fact, was universal. But what probably wasn't universal was what we find appealing as the rhythms, as the scales, as the harmonies. We can see that in the evolution of music today. Music has this tie between magic and mathematics. So we go back to Pythagoras, who linked music to mathematics, and he tried to have sounds that could be tied to ratios and numbers. Sappho, who died the year Pythagoras was born, was a very dominant lyre musician who dealt with this thing. The African drummers developed novel rhythms, but today they're all codified. The blues was felt to break all the rules of rhythms, but today they're codified. Mark Twain said Wagner's music is better. Wagner's music is better than it sounds. There's an old joke here, which is you give you the answer, so the answer is 9W. That's the answer. So what's the question? The question is, Mr. Wagner, do you spell your name with a V? 9W. See? Empedocles lived roughly the same time, played the lyre, wrote in verse, and was a shaman who claimed he could raise the dead to life. Confucius lived at the exact same time as Pythagoras and is credited with collecting the classic Chinese folk lyrics, now known as the Xinjing, or the Book of Songs. 305 lyrics come from anonymous authors, but the obvious feminine narrative perspective suggests women were responsible for many of them. Then we go through bulls and sex toys. The music of Mesopotamia focused on animals and on sex. The Lascaux paintings are 10,000 years older than Mesopotamia, and they focused on animals. The excavations of Nippur in Mesopotamia found thousands upon thousands of sex toys. And Ed Duana the daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, was the first known singer-songwriter in history in Ur in 3000 BC, and her songs were loaded with sexual innuendo. So in the Odyssey, Demodocus is summoned to sing the songs of deeds of past heroes. It just goes on and on. One tradition here is the feminine that deals with fertility, ecstasy, and magic. And the other tradition, the masculine, deals with the discipline, power, and groups. So Plato praised music that instills civic virtues and order, and wants to dismiss songs of lamentation and undesirable emotional traits. The age of chivalry was heightened when drums became part of military campaigns, instilling order and conformity. The songs of the troubadours dealt with feminine issues such as love and emotions after a hiatus of 1500 years. So this is in the Middle Ages. And songs of boasting and praise are mirrored in hip hop and also in Sappho. So we end up with, sex showing up here all over the place. So one masculine strain of music deals with order and masculine traits, and it's aligned with mathematics and institutional prerogatives. But there's the female strain of music that deals with intense feelings, magic, and trance states, much more mystical and spiritual. So the highbrow versus lowbrow, symphony hall versus commonality. And this is a constant theme, as we'll see as we get into this, that the highbrow people put the money up for things like symphony halls. But the real innovation in music occurs in the masses, in the lowbrow side of things. So this is where rock and roll came from. You had New Orleans blues, you had a little bit of Nashville country western, a little bit of Chicago jazz, and they all came together to create rock and roll.
And they say the country western came out of Scotch Irish
Yeah.
music.
So you can see that the real innovation that occurs in music is with the masses, with the lowbrow people, and the things like hip hop, or in the end of the 60s, there was just a lot of psychedelic, a lot of LSD floating around. The outside strain needs to constantly infuse the inner established strain with energy, otherwise it decays and is ignored. And this comes from Pindar, the Roman poet. So storytelling songs do a much better job than just lyrics in teaching others. This is one of the things that's amazing, is the song Yesterday by Paul McCartney. It's only 2.5 minutes long, but he tells a complete story there in 2.5 minutes. And it makes it much more powerful than just the lyrics themselves. Rolling Stone magazine ranked it as the #1 song of all time, for whatever that's worth. The parables of Jesus are very powerful because of the stories that they tell. We're familiar with a number of the parables of Jesus, but they're probably approaching 40 of them in the New Testament, and not in John, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke have them. So the ones that people are familiar with is the prodigal son, or the wedding, where he loaves and fishes into enough to feed 5,000 people. So the storyteller, the stories really are things you can remember. The Navajos were capable of classifying 700 different species of plants. The Matsis in the Amazon rainforest documented their knowledge of plants for medicinal purposes and created a 500-page book. And the Hanu in the Philippines classified 1,625 different species of plants. So each of these, they remember them. There's a story that goes with each of these plants, or what they do. The Avaniki in Siberia encoded 700 songs on a stick. The Native Americans encoded songs with beaded belts. And Stonehenge may well encode knowledge that we're not aware of. But it could be music. A key point here is that outside music infuses conventional music with new energy. So the coffee houses impact popular music. And the fusion of New Orleans jazz, Chicago blues, Nashville country, as we said, led to the creation of modern rock and roll. And then the Beatles picked up on this and played it back to the US and to the rest of the world. So they were putting their spin on it, but it had all started in these other places. Those that are on the edge of society, the peasants, the field workers, the bohemians, are the ones that have the greatest impact on music that tells stories. So James Ironhead Baker had hundreds of Negro spirituals in his memory while in prison in Texas, or Vasily Shikolnikov amazed with her peasant songs, or the Canterbury Tales of Chaucer, or Chanson de Roland, revolve around storytelling. Paradise Lost. John Milton dictated this every morning to his daughters since he was blind. He couldn't read. Shakespeare wove music into all his various writings, plays, and poems. And of course, we have Beowulf, who's an epic story of a hero. So storytelling is a key part of music. Every great storyteller was blind, so as not to be hindered in reading, and this led to the development of memory. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are 195 sutras. They're each 3 to 5 words of Sanskrit. So you can memorize them. It's not out of the question. But the wedding of Smelajik Meho, which is roughly as long as either the Iliad or the Odyssey, it takes 7 days to recite. So somehow this person is able to keep this story in their head, which is as long as the Iliad or the Odyssey. Many singers say they can't remember a song unless they have their instrument in their hand. And then saxophonist Charlie Parker relies on a set of key chords to recall music. What appears to be improvisation was really quite a set piece. Then we go to the singer. The original instrument is the voice. So today we focus on the singer and not the song. Most people probably can recognize the singer from photographs. But in times past, it was the song and not the singer that was important. The song captured communal priorities and demands. So even with Edohana in Ur in 3000 BC, the focus is on the intimacy of the lyrics, but not on her as a person. The Egyptian New Kingdom of 1300 BC is the start of the singer. And Sappho of Lesbos in 800 BC is credited with inventing lyrics to convey emotions. But one of the things you have to keep in mind here is music didn't really have any way to record it. So when you get to someone like Hildegard von Bingen, they didn't have the notion of, they would draw some horizontal lines, and then they would put a smudge, and if it was a small smudge, it was a short note, and if it was a bigger smudge, it was a longer note, and so forth. But there was no notion of half notes, quarter notes, of beats, of having measures. All of these things came about, in the last several hundred years. We had the Beatles, every song performed on the Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964, which I still remember, was a love song. But they threatened the establishment, just like Elvis did when he was shaking his hips, or Sinatra did in the 40s, or swing did in the 30s, or jazz and blues in the 20s, going all the way back to the 18th dynasty in Egypt. So the love songs were in fact protests over norms in society, intending to challenge the norm. But the same conditions that characterize the spread of disease also hold for music. This is why port cities like New York, New Orleans, Liverpool, Venice, and Havana are melting pots for music. The Beatles mentioned this several times, that because Liverpool was a seaport, they would end up seeing music first there that the rest of England wouldn't see. And they jumped on this. So they were very much into, for example, the Isley Brothers, that did Twist and Shout, and other Black musicians. They were all over Motown from when Motown got going. So in all likelihood, music spread from Egypt to Lesbos, to Greece, to Rome, and then it gets to where we're at today. So the Song of Songs by Solomon came out of the same environment as that of Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, but the political realm and the religious realm, or the personal realm, are all impacted by the Song of Songs, the song of a king, a prophet, and a lover. So the power brokers want to take advantage of a popular social song. So look at Elvis going to see Richard Nixon, or the Pope taking on Italian opera, and so forth. The authorities fail to control the music, but the songs defy the ruling class and expand the arena of freedom for the populace. So here we find that music divides into the vulgar and the sacred by 500 BC. The politically sanctioned music of the elite is taught and propagated. The music of the vast masses is vulgar, and that evolves and propagates just as well. So Plato feared that the vulgar music could undermine the social order, but he also argued that music could shape the soul, like Motown did. So it was where the word soul music came from. Children start with sounds, lullabies put them to sleep and calm them down. The music of the soul prevails over the disordered cry of the baby. So Socrates and Plato's Phaedra, popular music is poetic and mythic, while great music is aligned with philosophy. So there you have it. Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics devote considerable space to the flute as an instrument to be avoided or disparaged, and they point to the lyre as a far superior instrument. Nietzsche saw the flute and the lyre as emblematic of the tendencies of Apollo, the elite with rulemaking and restraint, and of Dionysus, the masses with rule-breaking and irrationality. So the lyre promotes harmony and order, while the flute instigates passion and ecstasy. The guitar in the 20th century led to blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, rock, and all of this led to the overthrow of Pythagoras. But today, the electric guitar replaces the flute as instigating passion and ecstasy. And the lesson is that music can overthrow a political regime. Look at the 1960s. That's one thing that I've noticed about today. There's really no great music. And I'm wondering what's going on. You know, the music that Trump is playing is YMCA, which is, I don't know.
I don't know if he understood that it was gay.
No, I don't think so. So Eratosthenes, the pupil of Aristotle, wrote Elements of Harmony, the first book on the structure of music, but he distanced his work from that of Pythagoras, where all music is mathematics. And he distanced his work even further from harmonicoid, or the harmonists, who found their music by improvising on instruments rather than writing music according to structural rules. So music split into that for the elite, the Dorian, and that for the slaves, the Lydia and the Phrygia. These are Dorian, Lydia, and Phrygia are different scales that if you listen to them, you'd see they're quite different. Dorian is again very classical, and these others are very emotional. The blues scales all originated with slaves, and because this mass music was suppressed by the elites, we don't know a lot about it. That's the problem. So Plato in the Laws describes good music for men and bad music for women, which is what Plato did. The songs from the women are powerful. The sirens in the Odyssey lure men to death. The violent Dionysian trances lead women to kill blindly in ecstasy. Plutarch in De Musica disparages the feminine impact on music ad nauseum. He's a true male chauvinist. And the Catholic Church carried this out even further with papal denouncements, fire and brimstone sermons, church council hearings, and whispered exhortations in the confessional. That was one of the things that Hildegard von Bingen did, was she managed 3 different abbeys with all these nuns, and she had these visions of music, which was really monophonic. There's just one theme. But by having the women do it, you could get these sopranos, and there's a lot of this stuff on YouTube that you can find. But the thing about this was the Catholic Church, it was having these Gregorian chants, which were all men. So they of course sent out somebody from Rome to go check out what Hildegard was doing, because we don't do this, and she was able to carry the day, and her music is still with us. In Japan, we have the tale of Genji, and the women perform, but behind these screens, you can just see their shadows. China interpreted women's songs as Confucian teaching, so women disappear with male domination, the end result. There you have it. Now, the Roman nobility dealt with the kithara and horns for the legions. So this is very male. But the masses dealt with effeminate music and dance and pantomime in the theaters. In every town in the Roman Empire, there was always a stage in every single town in the Roman Empire. Stoicism was dominant in the Roman Empire, so by limiting your emotions and passions, you'd be less frustrated in life. But the power of music, the music of the masses was well known. As we said, 90% of all these songs deal with love, which was felt to be undignified, and you shouldn't even talk about it. And 90% of all music criticism dealt with the other 10% of all the songs beside love songs. So there you have it. Moji in Against Music, written in China, about the time of Socrates, was a diatribe against music. Making music is wrong, and the effort spent on music should be spent on more useful activities. Music does not feed the poor or clothe them. It does not contribute to the social order or reduce the chaos of daily life. But the farmers who listen to music will lose their crops. Women who listen to music will not cook and sew and make clothing. So Confucius emphasized music's role in education, ritual, and sensuality. And even today, the musician is a channeler of violence and sacrifice and sin. Look at the Catholic Mass with the death and transfiguration, the body and blood of Jesus. The devil's songs, the Christianity for millennia dealt solely with vocal music, chants, and choirs. Bach reversed this by moving to instruments, the violin and the organ, and then the Psalms themselves celebrate instrumental, not vocal music. So the elimination of the instruments removed elements of ecstasy and trance, and the percussion can have a major impact. Eliminating it soothes the mind. So here's the music of the lute and the music of the basses. You think of the Baptist church services in the US today, where they go at it for 2, 3, 4 hours every Sunday with the organ and everybody in sight singing. And it's a really joyous occasion, but it's definitely not the music of the elite. Pope Gregory in the 6th century was a powerful music innovator, and he created the Gregorian chant and popularized the music of Saint Benedict. And then we had Abelard and Heloise, and their love songs are all suppressed, 2 very intelligent, capable individuals. And in rural China at funerals, female strippers strip to mass music in an erotic trance. So here you get everything. Look at Bob Dylan in the 1960s with folk rock at the Newport Jazz Festival, and then getting his Nobel Prize in 2016. The African-American music played a role of instigator in music. Southern plantation, slave songs, jazz, blues, rhythms, Motown becoming mainstream hip hop, and on and on. And the troubadours in the south of France, drawing on the music from North Africa, popularized singing in the vernacular. So William IX, the Duke of Aquitaine, set the tone of music for the next millennium, the singer, songwriter, and going beyond music to define what romance meant. Egyptian women of Deir el-Medina were singing love songs 2 millennia ago. Female slave singers from Baghdad sang love songs that spread to North Africa and then to Western Europe. So the slave is an outsider, has no allegiance or fealty to the elite norms, conventions, and values, and therefore can take a fresh look at music and themes. 2 ways. The first great innovator of Mukhanaf music in the Islamic world was highly effeminate and very unlucky in life. Even today, the 8th century erotic wine poems and songs of Abu Nuwas find the Egyptian Ministry of Culture burning 6,000 copies of his poetry books. They have nothing better to do. This is a need to be the trickster, not to directly attack institutions such as slavery, but rather stylized use of words, loaded meanings, and the desire to goad and provoke rather than front assault. So in 1948, an erotic love song surfaced in the Middle Ages clearly in the vernacular of Islam. In the 1960s, much more was discovered to show the impact of Islamic slave music on Western European music, such as troubadours. The lute gets its name from alud in Arabic, meaning of wood, the lute. The Cantigas de Santa Maria, there are 2 lute players, one dark-skinned and dominant, one white-skinned and inferior, playing songs. The center of music education in 1000 AD in Cordoba, with a population of 500,000 in Cordoba then. Zirab, the blackbird, so his skin is black. He was a renowned teacher who merged African and European traditions, and the troubadours created the notion of courtships and all that it meant: allegiance to your lady, responding to her every whim, acquiescing to her scoldings with silence. Now, the thing to keep in mind is not all wizards carried wands. Kerkman, Circle the World, wrote the funeral music for William X, the son of William IX, the first troubadour. Traveled throughout the Mediterranean, probably on the Second Crusade. Marcabru, a student of Kerkman, was a juggler, or performer of songs of others. Then started writing his own songs, scathing attacks on nobility. I'm sure that didn't go over well. Bernard de Ventadon wrote love songs even to the wife of the Viscount of Ventadorn, and then went to Eleanor of Aquitaine, who in 1154 was crowned Queen of England and also of France. And so in the early Middle Ages, the songs were for the glory of God, not for the singer. In the age of the troubadours, over 500 troubadours are identified by name, and the songs are of love. And the church brought in St. Francis of Assisi wrote Canticle of the Sun, a troubadour love song. But the cries for love are also for chastity. So there you go. 24 female troubadours, or trouverites, made up 5% of the surviving music, 1 song each, while 2,600 songs survive for the male troubadours. So go figure. 24 is 24. The female singers devote less effort to wordplay and more to realism than the male troubadours, and the songs deal with feelings of unrequited love or a broken heart, and still fused with passion, but poetically direct emotive expression. So 2 groups of women dominated this music, nuns and prostitutes. They wrote the lament, the lullaby, and the love song. The magical music of shamans is by female shamans. The love song and the lament resurrected a dying god, and music became a change agent or a catalyst. In other words, it was magical. Eleanor of Aquitaine may have brought music of the trouvères to England, when she became queen. Princess Beatrice of Burgundy married Frederick I, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and she may have brought the music of the trouvères to Germany. And Guillaume de Provence, a trouvère, may have brought the story of Parsifal, a knight of the Round Table, to Germany, leading to a national epic with Eschenbach and Wagner. So the Albigensian crusade against the Cathars was due in part to Islamic music, influencing the music of the south of France. The Cathars are proto-punk rock, and the Cathars had the consolamentum sacrament administered just before death. So this would lead to a more ribald and free-swinging eroticism in music, because just before you're about to die, everything's going to get cleaned up. So you eat, drink, and be merry. The Cathar clergy many times were women, so the music was more feminine and amorous, and the Catholic Church just barely tolerated musicians. The Council of Cloves Show forbade the Benedictines from allowing poets, harpers, musicians, and buffoons into their monasteries. Priests were forbidden from playing the gleeman with himself or others. St. Mary's in East Yorkshire has a minstrels column. A chapel dedicated to St. Julian of the Minstrels is in Paris, and St. Bartholomew's is a minstrel priory. So the medieval musicians held little to no rights. They were often persecuted. The Pied Piper of Hamelin sang the rats into the river. When the town didn't pay the piper, he sang the children into the river. The invention of the audience. So the troubadours listened to the audience and modified their songs to the wishes of those that listened. This is something new. The first mass in the vernacular in 1300 by Guillaume de Machaut was done by a very popular songwriter and singer of love songs, but most music prior to this was anonymous, with the exception of Hildegard von Bingen, who created the largest body of medieval music of anyone. It looks like she has over 70 songs that I think you can find 20 or 30 of them on YouTube. The term audiencia, referring to the act of hearing or listening, was not needed. Most songs are simply created without any thought of an audience, which is why the emergence of the audience as a judge of artistic merit is such a sea change in culture. This was when pop culture got pop. So the Cathars were probably the start of the import of the audience, but the town of Arras, roughly 100 miles north of Paris on the border with Belgium, enjoyed an explosion of musical activity in the 1300s, and many songs continue to focus on the mobility, but many deal with commoners and the theme of erotic love again and again. The original troubadours audience could have been nobility, but commoners listened to the songs of the trouvères of northern France and the minnesingers of Germany, leading to genres, lie, chanson de trois, pastorelle, that followed the basic plots of movies and TV shows that are created today. There's something like, there's only, I don't know, 15 basic plots that encompass everything. So the songs of the trouvères lead directly to the songs of Star Wars and the Holy Grail of today. In all likelihood,
this is very Joseph Campbell thinking.
Yeah.
Don't you think, Bud? I think he would agree with it. All of this very strongly.
Yeah, it's very Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, things became very formulaic.
So in all likelihood, the dance was tied to the song. So the audience was also involved in dancing to the music, not simply listening to the music. So the 4-bar phrase in music, AABA, as personified by the Beatles, that was their signature. You have one verse of 4 bars, one verse of 4 bars, then a counter to it, and then again a repeat of this AABA. In all likelihood, it was due to dance, the needing 4 bars to make a complete motion on the dance floor. In other words, the beat of the peasant feet impact Mozart. So these medieval singers originate the songs and dances that the Renaissance takes credit for. Music trends are a leading indicator for music itself, and the associated dances are going. The concert hall can serve as ritualized substitute for violence, death, and resurrection. But what's different is musicians actually commit crimes such as murder and are not punished for it. Carlo Gesualdo, a fine madrigal composer, murdered his wife and her lover, the Duke of Andria. Not only killed them both, but he went back to make sure they were really dead and was never punished, as one example. The composer Joaquin de Prez, born 1450, was viewed as equal to Michelangelo or to Virgil. And at the same time, in 1450 to 1475, a standard repertoire of songs emerged that others built on. So starting in the Renaissance, towns and cities hired musicians or minstrels, and the nobility were in competition for the best composers and singers. The Meistersingers had a book, the tabulatur, that codified the rhyming of words, the number of syllables in a line, where to breathe. And so competition for new Meistergesang focused on not making mistakes, not creativity. However, Wagner, if you listen to the Meistersinger, you'll see Wagner ended up taking a lot of liberty with this for the Meistergesang, or the master song. The musicians composed songs or jingles for different products in the Renaissance, with examples compiled by Guillaume de Villeneuve, Francesco Landini, Clement Janiquin, and voulait avoir la Cri de Paris. In 1938, the Federal Writers Project documented thousands of New York City street vendor cries, with Harlem especially rich. This is one of these things that Roosevelt created to stimulate, to get artists employed. Many towns and cities in Europe in the Middle Ages used trumpeters to sound the watch with various chords. All of this is lost. In fact, if you go to Siena, San Dimigliano, which is next to Siena, you can see there's maybe half a dozen towers there that were up on the city walls, and that's where the trumpeters went. All of these have been taken down. All these towers have been taken down, but San Dimigliano still has, a few of these. Bells were used in many towns and cities, variety of ringtones, sizes of bells, and competitions. So the carillon was introduced in Flanders in 1510, which is an array of tuned bells driven by keyboard and pedals. We have a carillon here at Yale in New Haven, and where I grew up in Detroit, there was a Cranbrook school that had a carillon. So they're not very common. Joan of Arc, after her victory in battle, was greeted with 500 ringing bells. Bells evoke a wide variety of emotions: fear, loathing, reverence, and pride. And bells, not trumpets or drums, are the hallmark of civic authority and control. Yet most books simply ignore the importance of bells in daily life. We actually have here in the area a woman who is an outstanding, to put it mildly, handbell performer, and she teaches classes in this, and has different concerts were put on. We had a Christmas concert that was entirely bells, just that she put together. But it's rare. It takes a lot of work to put together these handbell concerts. 1600 was a key juncture. We had the oldest surviving opera, Ecstasy, that debuted on October 6th, and the first oratorio debuted in June. So the madrigal was flourishing under the hands of Claudio Monteverdi and so forth, but the basso continuo emerged as an important musical technique. A bass line and chords accompanies a melody, leading to treble clef and bass clef. So this is where you see for the first time having treble clef and bass clef. They're 5 notes apart. Instrumental works called sonatas appeared for soloists or small groups, and the culmination of all this was personality-driven ethos in music. All of the change, of course, was criticized by the establishment, yet the establishment over time embraced this new wave of innovation and built on it. And at the end of the Renaissance, we encounter a panoply of profitable music businesses. Zildjian, which is a maker of cymbals and drum accessories, was founded in Istanbul in 1623, and they're still in business today doing cymbals and drum accessories. Music publishing appeared in the early 1600s, and Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag, for example, sold over 1 million single sheets of music around the year 1900. And this was a very, again, counterculture piece of music, a ragtime. He ended up, people were buying player pianos, so there wasn't simply the single sheets of music, but they were getting music that would run a player piano, and that was what really moved a lot of this, especially in pubs. Opera appeared for private entertainment with elites, and then morphed into public appearances for profit. And there were many other opportunities to make money from music. So we're starting to see that music is becoming a business and you're making money. Monteverdi was in Venice, the center of music publishing, and the opera moved from private to public audiences. William Byrd and Thomas Tallis were granted a patent for publishing blank music scores for 21 years by Queen Elizabeth. Could you imagine getting this? Having a patent on this? That's unbelievable. Jean-Baptiste Lully composed ballet choreography and music, and he danced to it with Louis XIV. He played guitar, he performed on the street as a harlequin, collaborated with Moliere, and created the French overture, helped establish opera in France, and controlled all operas in France, experimented with exotic musical instruments like castanets and bagpipes, and wrote music for Catholic services. You could just imagine what sort of Catholic service he put together with castanets and bagpipes. Lully was prickly, writing a scandalous poem about his patroness and being married with 10 children while having 3 love affairs with 3 different men. And this led to losing the favor of Louis XIV when he seduced a young page. Until the end of the 16th century, women singers were either nuns or prostitutes, but now they're divas in Italian operas, commanding far more pay than the composer of the opera. The Catholic Church was against music and all its innovations throughout the Middle Ages. Music was tied to sin and erotic ideas like dance. The Council of Trent, 1543, saw the Catholic Church start to co-opt music for its own purposes, all for the service of God. If you cannot beat them, join them. So in the 1960s, guitars began to appear in Catholic services. In the 1970s, Christian heavy metal music appeared, followed by Christian hip hop in the 1980s. In China in the 1100s, they imposed moralistic interpretations on the songs of Xinjiang. When it was noticed, these songs were primarily sung by promiscuous in the back alleys of various towns and cities. And the lyric poem Gita Govinda, 12th century Sanskrit poet Jadaviva, conveys the erotic spiritualism of the milkmaid Radha for the Hindu god Krishna. So there's a common back and forth between music and erotic spirituality time and again, from the hymns of the Enheduanna in Mesopotamia to A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. The Balls of Bengal were spiritual minstrels of South Asia who were accused of hedonism and mad music spirituality. What else is new? The Rabindranath Tagore drew on this Bengali culture to earn the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913. Tagore wrote over 2,000 songs and 2 national anthems. And Bob Dylan, who said he was an American ball, and Allen Ginsberg in beat poetry were followers of the balls. Jalal al-Din Rumi brought all of this together in Islam, a poet who, like Dante, celebrated a transcendent spirituality a source of spiritual wisdom like St. Francis, established the Sama ritual, a Sufi ceremony integrating music, dance, poetry, meditation, and prayer to integrate human aesthetic and spiritual impulses into a codified practice of ecstasy, the whirling dervishes, which are now suppressed. The castrati of St. Mark's in Venice, 40 young boys in a choir, now forbidden. Martin Luther, miracles of the eyes are inferior to those of the ears. Germany became a center of music for a century, leading to Beethoven, Bach, and Brahms. For many, Bach appears to be a saint, yet Bach was imprisoned for a month. He pulled a knife on a fellow musician in a street fight. He went on beer drinking binges weeks at a time, 20 known children plus one consort in the organ loft. So he was promiscuous, shall we say. And then Leipzig had to deal with action after action due to Bach. But so it goes. Bach's music was subversive for its time, but the bold structures and incredible display of technique, they were called bombastic and confused, but the music was an excess of art, an unending string of metaphors and figures. And in other words, what made Bach great in later times made him subversive in his time. Bach's music was studied after he died for its virtuosity, but it was not loved. And in fact, there was a gap here till around 1800 when Mendelssohn jumped on this and had Bach come out into the forefront as a real giant in music. And this helped German nationalism with a rising wave of spirituality. In the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1, Fugue in B minor, Bach, his theme used all 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Bach subverted religious conventions that made liturgical music subservient to logos, the divine word, and Bach subverted prevalent notions of musical proprietary, which demanded that excessive style adapt itself to the specific functions and purposes of the occasion. Bach subverted the dogma of that art was a mirror to nature and must adhere to natural forms of expression rather than impose its own self-referential value system onto artistic works. So as Bach emerged, so did German nationalism. And so Bach subverted the traditional metrics of musical invention, all of these time-honored techniques. I got this here. But he subverted the expectations of musical piety, which demanded that a work of art should express its devotion in reverent and orderly subservience to the grandeur of God, and not the glory of the composition or its composer. At the end of the day, it was impossible to dismiss his achievements that were so broad that if one were to be open-minded about these accomplishments. Bach wrote many masses and religious works, yet his most popular works are secular. Bach was the turning point when the church supported him and other musicians that the masses wanted his secular music, not his cantatas or mass in B minor. The mass in B minor, many people argue, is the most complete piece of music in the history of modern music. It has everything in it. Vivaldi was ordained as a priest, yet his Four Seasons were a popular pagan work, evocative of a deity dying in winter and coming to life in the spring. When Handel turned to the Messiah late in his life, it was to make money by theater performances. Handel was doing Italian operas, and they just went out of style. So he invented this thing called an oratorio, where he took pieces of scripture and put music to it. Voila, you have the Messiah. Haydn was a choir boy in Vienna and became a composer, but his popularity was achieved in concerts, not in the churches. Haydn was the first of the composers to become a celebrity, but Haydn's last will and testament rewarded many women, not his wife. When Haydn went to London, he made 20 extra monies he made composing for his royal family back in Germany. Mozart created Don Giovanni with the assistance of the librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, skilled in seduction, was a close friend and lover of Giacomo Casanova. Mozart became independently wealthy with all his different pieces of music and performances of the music, but he kept his letters with numerous citations to many, many women other than his wife, many of them servants, singers, and women in other parts of Europe that he encountered in his travels. So there you go. Say you want a revolution. Do you still have vision of Beethoven as a conservative in music? When Chuck Berry wanted to announce the triumph of rock and roll over classical music, he wrote the song Roll Over Beethoven. None of this was true. Beethoven was truly revolutionary for his time. His piano sonata started with what Mozart had done, and then piece by piece, Beethoven improvised, and the very form of a sonata morphed into his form. So Beethoven wrote probably, I think, 33 piano sonatas, and they're kind of like scratch music. He's thinking about, let me try and get this down, and then I'll use it someplace else. But none of it was performed in his life. None of it. Maybe one of the 33 sonatas, maybe. But his Ode to Joy has been embraced over the years by the leaders of both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, Mao's Cultural Revolution, at a point when almost all Western music was forbidden in China, the Peruvian Shining Path, terrorist Abamel Guzman, and the apartheid regime in South Africa. Chuck Berry missed it here. Ode to Joy, as you can see, roll over Beethoven, Beethoven wins. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was performed to commemorate the fall of the Berlin Wall by Leonard Bernstein in '89. And in fact, the Morita, who was the founder of Sony, when they were developing the compact disc, he said that you had to have Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on one side of the disc. That determined that it would last for 70 minutes. That's where that came from. So folk music breaks down hierarchies, opposes the elite, and gives a voice to the masses of vocal and instrumental musicians. So Herder, every human perfection is national. The folk are the center of art, music, poetry, sculpture, and dance, and folk music flourished for millennia. It's only recently that problems arise. The advent of nationalism by song, promoting the good old nostalgic days, music to promote social causes, classic music adopting folk music themes. You energize populist music for the masses. There's a whole new field of intellectual study dealing with this and cultural authenticity. So some individuals try to raise the public consciousness and sensitivity to higher levels of aesthetics. And sometimes this works, but sometimes it doesn't. Today, the word taste seems to have disappeared from the canon. And the problem is the vitality of music comes from innovations in the folk music, not in the elite realms. So today, the word slumming is used to describe dealing with subcultures. But the New York Times in 1884 offered guidance to colored colony between 20th and 30th Streets, promising a short stroll there would lead to some of the lowest beer saloons in the city, dingy and dirty, frequented by the vilest characters of both sex. There you have it. Paris saw Le Chat Noir open in 1881 and Moulin Rouge in 1889. I think Moulin Rouge just closed.
Really?
And the Lido, I think Lido still might be there. Zurich saw the Cabaret Voltaire open in 1917, which is the most avant-garde club of all. And Lenin lived across the street from it. The European cabarets took their names from animals, a bat, an oxen, a cat, like early rock and roll songs took their names from the animals, beetles or crickets or yardbirds and turtles, or even the animals. The Café du Nantes, coffins for the tables with guillotines and skeletons all over. The Café de l'Enfer, musicians dressed as devils in a cauldron over a real fire. Café du Ciel, beautiful women danced as angels, and all proclaimed decadence and self-nihilism, but compared today's punk and postmodern. So the Black population of the United States reinvented music in the 20th century with ragtime blues, early jazz, swing, rhythm and blues, soul, reggae, samba, boogie woogie, doo-wop, bebop, calypso, funk, salsa, and so on. And the music that started on the slave boats from Africa was just a drum and singing and dancing enforced with a lash. The Black musicians dominated in the antebellum South on steamboats in the Mississippi and the Ohio River, at elite resort hotels and private parties. Calling out steps and movements while playing led to square dancing, hoedowns, and traditional folk dancing. The first slave ship arrived in North America in 1619. Took 300 years to overcome the disdain for Black music by white citizens. Oh, Susanna by Stephen Foster sold over 100,000 copies of printed music. Up to that point in time, 500 copies would be a phenomenal success, so he was off the charts. But Foster drew on Black slave music. He had no real firsthand knowledge of the South and slavery. Camptown Races was built on the work of Black musicians, but Foster made all the money. Intolerant bigotry and sentimental affection do not fit together. Black music was everywhere in the United States in the 19th century, but all the money was made by white musicians doing Black music. And Black music could deal with subjects that were very taboo for white music. And so at the turn of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, Black music was into hugging and kissing and much more eroticism. White music was not, but whites loved hearing this music. So mainstream America wanted more exciting music, ragtime, jazz, blues, etc. There was in Dahomey, there was a Negro musical comedy. There was a play put on Broadway, just to give you an example. So World War I disrupted these mainstream musical trends and made it possible for jazz to emerge in 1917. W.C. Handy wrote St. Louis Blues. So there's a jazz piece by a comedian. Vaudeville replaced minstrel shows as mainstream entertainment. Musicians, ventriloquists, acrobats, comedians, pet tricks, jugglers, dancers, and practitioners of various stunts, impersonations, and so forth. The blues musics were primarily Black-born in incredible poverty. Mississippi suffered from widespread poverty and enjoyed the lowest per capita income of any state. That's still the case, I'm pretty sure, today. During the glory days of the Mississippi Delta Blues, it had the lowest penetration of automobiles, telephones, and radios of any state. And even electricity was a short supply in Mississippi when only 1% of the farms in the state in 1937 had access to electricity. Elvis Presley came out of Mississippi as the king of rock and roll, but we also had Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Sam Cooke, Charlie Parton, Sun Hose, B.B. King, Albert King, John Lee Hooker, Skip James, Elmore James, Bubka White, Bo Diddley, and many, many more, all out of Mississippi. Blues was from Africa, but Mississippi made it mainstream, as did other centers of early music from Texas to Appalachia with similar demographic patterns of poverty and isolation. The blues involved the intentional bending of notes, not the results of poor singing ability, with the reliance on 3 chords and a fixation on the themes of hard luck, love, and violence. So Bo Carter was singing Please Warm My Wiener or Banana in Your Fruit Basket. And did Bessie Smith fool anyone with the song Need a Little Sugar in My Bowl? I don't think so. Songs about guns were surprisingly common, and these adopted the style of praise odes, a lineage that stretches from ancient bards, including Pindar, all the way to contemporary hip hop, wearing Gucci and Nike apparel. But what's usually taught about 12-bar blues, the earlier practitioners, blues, we saw the Beatles, everything was AABA, but there's a 12-bar format for blues that's also widely used. But a lot of the earlier practitioners didn't follow this, but now it looks like there many more are. The blues embodied explicit sexual references, celebrations of violence, allusions to altered mind states, whether produced by intoxicants or shamanic type visions, magic and superstitions, and other indecorous matters. And we have many, many celebrities of the blues here. Jazz conquered mainstream music at almost the same time and pace as blues. So jazz is an urban music that came out of the hustle and bustle of the most multicultural city at the dawn of the 20th century, New Orleans. The jazz idiom thrives in melting pot situations because it's outwardly focused and hungry for new sources of inspiration. The blues, in contrast, first emerged in the most isolated rural areas, and its aesthetic beauty has more to do with traditions and legacies preserved from the past. You can still hear the griots of Africa, those community storytellers and preservers of cultural lore in the blues. These influences also reverberate in jazz, but with more of an Afrofuturist vibe, a greater receptiveness to the possibilities of synthesis and metamorphosis. The rag-infused jazz of New Orleans placed greater emphasis on improvisation, not just playing the melody, but playing with the melody. The Baptist religion had a major impact on jazz and blues. 3-hour Sunday services loaded with vocal and instrumental music made the day. Trumpets, trombones, drums, along with organs and vocalists. The oldest original jazz song is called Funky Butt, and Louis Armstrong ought to be best remembered for his extraordinary recordings of the late 1920s and early 1930s when he set a gold standard for jazz with things like West End blues, Potato Head blues, and heebie-jeebies. But Duke Ellington was the real innovator of the early decades of the idiom, no one could really rival his impact. One of the problems he always faced was he could never stay in the hotels that the concert halls were at. He was black, but he's held up there with Copland, Shostakovich, Stravinsky, and Bartók as one of the truly great elite American composers. Woody Herman, whose band performed the debut of Stravinsky's Ebony Concerto at Carnegie Hall in March 1946, only a few months later served up lighthearted dance music in the Hollywood film New Orleans. Count Basie, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Glenn Miller, Artie Shaw, and other hit parade band leaders of World War II years had different agendas that didn't require the participation of a Hindemith or a Schoenberg, but they never wavered in their determination to maintain a high level of artistry while also pleasing artists and selling records. Benny Goodman promoted desegregation in 1935, decades before the Civil Rights Movement, with his black pianist Teddy Wilson setting the tone. Artie Shaw hired Billie Holiday as his black vocalist to match Goodwin. And two figures stand out among this, Duke Ellington and George Gershwin. If Benny Goodman sought legitimization by hiring Aaron Copland, I paid $2,000, and that's real money, the clarinetist later boasted. Ellington and Gershwin aimed to be the serious composers of their day. Olivier Messiaen followed up his seminal Quatuor pour la fin du temps, Quartet for the End of Time, first performed La Fin du Temps.
No, fan.
La Fin du
That's how you
Temps.
say it.
Quartet for the End of Time, first performed in a Nazi prison camp where the composer was in captivity, with works inspired by birdsong, the starting point for all music, according to Darwin. So this shift from ends to beginnings propels many of the most provocative musical projects of this era, and not just classical music. What is rap but a resurrection of pure expressivity of monopleonic chant? What is the EDM-driven rave but a return to trance-inspiring rituals of prehistory? the similarities of music and herding cultures has to do with animals. The music is calming or pastoral to the animals. It's not exciting. So the hunting societies relied on loud music and sounds to scare the animals, but the country music is herding music. Rock music is hunting music. Yodeling is country music personified for millennia. Rock music had to be promoted by white vocalists from poverty, and Elvis Presley debuted on Milton Berle with blue suede shoes and went on to 18 successive #1 chart toppers. Where did our love go? Marshall McLuhan said the medium is the message. So television was the new medium. When Elvis Presley was on Ed Sullivan, 82% of all TVs in the US were tuned to this show. When the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan in February '64, 73 million TVs tuned in. When the Beatles did the first satellite broadcast, 400 million tuned in. That's where the John Lennon wrote, "All You Need Is Love." That's the Beatles song on that. It was the first communication satellite, so they wanted to have groups from around the world performing music. And it was, I think, in the middle '60s. Motown brought black music to white audiences with Auto Factory scaling. Berry Gordy was there in Detroit, and he was actually working in Ford on the assembly line there, and he said, "I bet I could turn music into an assembly line." So he thought about it, and he recruited some writers who would write the songs. He had some musicians that would instrumentalists that were there, and he always picked up vocalists, background vocalists, and then he recruited these different groups: the Miracles, the Four Tops, the Temptations, the
Supremes.
Supremes. All of these groups went to a charm school. They each had a choreographer who ended up giving them a distinctive step while they were singing these songs. And they had a distinctive costumes. Each of them had different costumes. And so it goes. And so he just turned it into, just like I said, an assembly line for cranking out hit after hit after hit.
And the musicians were studio musicians.
Oh, they were great. This guy, James Jamerson, who did I Heard It for the Grapevine. That starts off with this bass beat, dum 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 dum.
Right.
You know, that was entirely him ad-libbing it.
But they weren't featured musicians. It was like an assembly line.
No. There was a movie out on them called The Funk Brothers. So you can go look at this, and they had a reunion back at Motown in Detroit.
But that was a real innovation to set it up like an assembly line.
Right.
So the studio
Right.
was in charge. He was the visionary, and the bands
Right.
were executing his vision in this, very systematized way. This very manufacturing kind of thing. It wasn't, but it was still really creative. It was still really.
What he did was, because black musicians couldn't perform before white audiences, he put them all on a bus and they went south from Detroit. They went to, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, East Texas. But then every Christmas they'd come back to Detroit, and each of the groups would get a 20-minute shot at doing something, which I went to, which was, this is totally off the charts in terms of music. It really is a religious experience. You have to go see this. And that pushed them over, so that the Supremes first were able to go to white audiences, and then the Temptations went, and then everything opened up. There was no longer these bars in the way. And the Beatles were right in the middle of it and helping them. When Stevie Wonder showed up, Paul McCartney had Stevie Wonder go to London to Prince Albert Hall to perform in like 1965. That's what McCartney thought of Stevie Wonder. He said, "This guy's off the charts." So the music is coming from the Beatles out of Liverpool, not London. And Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, yeah, they're out of London, but it's a really heavily gritty industrialized section of London. And the Animals came out of Newcastle, which is a mill town that was basically shutting down in England. You also had the Beach Boys in here doing Pet Sounds, where they actually had all the songs around a theme. And the Beatles liked it so much they did Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and basically made 100 times the money that the Beach Boys made. But there's a sacrifice that goes with this. Lennon was dead at age 40. Brian Jones was dead at age 27. Led Zeppelin, John Bonham was dead at age 32. And so it goes. Jim Morrison with the Doors, age 27. Jimi Hendrix, 27. Buddy Holly and the
I
Critic,
think Janis Joplin.
22.
Too.
Yeah, they don't have Janis. Kurt Cobain, 27. So a lot of them, here's Janis Joplin, 27, yeah. So, it's the drugs and the pace of doing these concerts and moving from this town to that town, it just takes a toll on them. These deaths can be attributed to natural causes. And so many of the traditional rituals combine music and violence in so many different ways. Martial arts, victim sacrifice, walking on hot coals, Sundance in the Americas, the Kavadi Atam in India, the Anastasia in Bulgaria, Capoeira in Brazil. The essence of rock as the music of permanent revolution is approach that liminal point where symbol turns into actual violence, but don't cross over. And the sacrificial imperative becomes most clear in the ritual destruction of musical instruments that was in vogue for a while. Why does rock music from this era reveal so many semblances to sacrificial rituals? Well, there's rites, whether real, there's a human being or an animal being sacrificed, or merely symbolic, or guitars being destroyed. They use the violence rampant in society by focusing on a special victim, usually innocent, and sometimes even treated as a hero or quasi-deity. But this special status may not exempt this figure from mockery and derision. And
The scapegoat.
yeah, and they ended up with new troubadours: Joni Mitchell, Carole King, Elton John, James Taylor, Nick Drake, Harry Chapin, Neil Young, Randy Newman, Don McLean, Cat Stevens, Carly Simon, and so forth. That was the counter push. So the black music was making a similar transition. So the group-oriented vocal harmony and the doo-wop and traditional R&B was now pushed aside by a funkier variant of the singer-songwriter movement. Diana Ross separated from the Supremes. Curtis Mayfield left the Impressions. Eddie Kendricks left the Temptations. Michael Jackson released his first music as a solo artist, although he continued to perform with the Jackson Five. In 1972, Smokey Robinson departed from the Miracles, and Sly Stone left his family to start recording as a solo act. And Stevie Wonder took this prevailing spirit of individualism to the next level, dismissing the Motown label studio musicians and songwriters who had accompanied his rise to fame. And he went ahead and he played all the instruments himself on all the tracks. He's a great performer. So go figure. By the dawn of the 30s, the hot jazz of the 20s had fallen out of favor. And there were all of these moody torch songs and upbeat novelty numbers, but this was just a passing interlude to the swing era with intense dance music coming back. In the 50s, this pattern repeated for the decade with dreamy pop music and novelty songs dominating the charts, but they gave way to the second half of the decade, the hotter dance music. And in the 70s, we had the same thing going to disco. So with the rock revolution, a low-key, nuanced aesthetic came to the forefront. And he sometimes relied on a guitar or piano for accompaniment. And they gained enthusiastic followings, but as lessons of history tell us, this wouldn't last. Fans are soon demanding something hotter, sexier, and more danceable. So when it arrived, we called it disco. This is short for discotheque, a French word originally signifying a collection of phonograph records, but it also indicated a change in the technology. Disco nightlife didn't need actual musicians, so this signaled a decisive break with the past, one that still defines the dance scene of the current day. Economic reality facilitated the shift. Hiring musicians to play dance music was expensive, but a DJ spinning records cost a fraction. And there were new attitudes and lifestyles that came with this. The Saturday Night Fever was the definitive movie, but then the director never considered putting musicians in the film, even though the Bee Gees did all the music, and it was one of the biggest selling soundtrack albums of all times. It just shows you what's going on. The music itself could hardly have been simpler. The tempos rarely deviated much from 120 beats per minute. When the music relied on a real flesh and blood drummer, the beat had to maintain a quasi-machine-like predictability, and fancy chord changes or arrangements are unnecessary or even distractions. And the lyrics, the slogan would survive, often little more than a banal exhortation. You should be dancing, get up and move. And on the floor, shake your booty, get down tonight. All of these are Bee Gees songs. And heavy metal and punk followed the similar track. The Sex Pistols were the epitome of the sacrificial ritual. So this takes us up to rap. And if you want to see the future of music, don't look at the stage, look at the audience. So the defining artists of the decade, Michael Jackson and Madonna, anticipated the late 20th century rules of audience engagement with prescient clarity. Just a few years before, rock megastars would have laughed in derision at anyone suggest the knowing slick dance steps would be essential to their career. But these new era MTV stars spent more time working on their dance routines than studying music theory, and they surrounded themselves with teams of dance professionals who could ensure that every move and gesture was as well crafted and rehearsed as any Broadway routine or buzzy Berkeley spectacle. So with his 1983 music video Thriller, which is, you have to see this to believe it, the Thriller, Michael Jackson pushed this aesthetic vision to the next level, a 14-minute plot-driven dance extravaganza that stands out as one of the most innovative short films of all time. And I would stand by that, even though it failed to achieve an Oscar nomination, but they didn't know what to make of it, basically. The audience loved it, that MTV started playing Thriller twice every hour, which you go figure. They don't need to do that. And the impact on record sales was more dramatic, became the best record album seller of all times, generated 7 hit singles, 8 Grammy Awards, and made Michael Jackson as the leading male music pop star. So no other singer had a support team that could match his. It included Quincy Jones, who just died, film director John Landis, the choreographer Michael Peters, Oscar award-winning makeup artist Rick Baker, and the combined marketing muscle of CBS, MTV, and Pepsi, among others. It's pretty powerful. But technology really impacts the business of music. With the printing press, it became possible to sell sheet music. The phonograph and record, it became possible to sell records and players. With the advent of radio, music began to cover regions tens of miles across. With the advent of television, music was recorded on videotape first, then other. And with the Walkman, cassette tapes held recorded music, then compact discs. And with the iPod, songs and albums were downloaded as you saw fit. So with the advent of streaming, any song and album could be accessed over the web and music concerts and associated merchandise are the main way that music now generates money. You don't get it you do it from live concerts, which you can charge huge amounts of money for, and you sell T-shirts. You don't sell beer at these concerts. It's more profitable to sell T-shirts, make more money out of doing this. So it goes. And that's it. So a little view of music and Bud, you've been sitting there all this time. Any comments? Bruce, any comments?
Wow. It's like, wow.
Yeah, really.
I'm gonna there's so much, but I gotta start with 1964. Being an amateur historian, you know, my experience with history, with learning history, was that history was a flat line. Well, I believe that there's a 44-year cycle, a gravitational wave. It goes up and down, and I'm going to plot it on an XY axis. And 1964 was just one of those is one of those points. 1964, everything that was happening then, the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, Lyndon Johnson, 2008, Obama gets elected, 1920, the suffrage, going all the way back to 1600, Bacon, in the split between science and spirituality, between science and the church. Another thing is, I think I sent you a link at one time to Culture and Spirituality by D. Paul Schaefer.
Yeah.
And that there was so much meat in that thing. But something I've been working on for quite a while is the history of opium and the opium wars and opium heroin addiction, and it goes back to 1824, 200 years to when the Russell brothers, the Russell cousins, cornered the market on opium in Turkey so that they could trade with China. And that's the backstory behind Skull and Bones, Yale, the CIA. The Russell Trust is the controlling interest for that. And Greg Barnhissel is a professor at Duquesne, and he just wrote a book, came out in October, about Norman Holmes Pearson, who was with the OSS, who was hired by Donovan. And then most of his career, or just about all of his career, was at Yale, where he was in the English department and helped started the American Studies program in 1947, which was also the year that they started the Directed Studies program. The other big piece here is the Renaissance, and there's so much of a millennia connection here. And my family, my ancestor, James Marsh, is known as the father of American Transcendentalism. He was the 5th president of the University of Vermont, and he published Coleridge in 1829. There's a piece on him that points out why there has been so much strife, and calls the North, the Teutonic and Protestant North, as opposed to the Catholic and Latin South. The Renaissance, Colonel Hayward was from the Midwest, was at the Union Club in New York City, recruited the Black Regiment, the 369th Regiment, takes them to France, the First World War, takes them to France with the band, where they fought under the French flag. They spent more time in combat, and they earned more medals than any other unit during the First World War. When they came back on February 17th, 1919, they had a parade going up into Harlem, which was the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. So my mind is just going boing, 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 boing with, that there's so many points you hit. Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, and how, they all come from the same source. The truth is one. The sages speak of it by many names. The transcendental revolt against materialism. This is one of my favorites, and how at the beginning of the revolution, this is a piece by Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., The Jacksonian Democracy in Literature. And historians of revolution describe a phenomena they have named the desertion of the intellectuals. This is a stage in society when the artists, writers, the intellectuals in general no longer find sustenance in the established order to feel much loyalty to it. They are filled with a pervading sense at once of alienation and of longing. One way or another controls their work. And so that's what's going to happen now. And the music, you've got me thinking about what the music is going to be. Ode to Joy is one of my favorites. Oh, yeah. And The School of Wisdom. Count Kieseling, 1920. The Russians had taken his estate, so he ended up marrying Bismarck's granddaughter, and they started their own circle, which included Richard Wilhelm, Rabindranath Tagore, Paul Tillich, Hermann Hesse, and I have really been following Paul Tillich, the existentialist, and one of the persons that he influenced was James Luther Adams, who was a Unitarian minister. Graduated from Harvard. Was influenced the UCC, and I've grown up in the Congregational Church. I had always taken the Congregational Church and the UCC, the United Church of Christ, to be synonymous, which it isn't. In 1961, he helped bring different groups together, and I think it was a German Reformed Church, the Congregational Church, and the Disciples of Christ. Also, one of the founders of SARC, the Society for Arts, Religion, and Contemporary Culture, and which led to the beginning of MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. Well, now they call it ARC, the Association, the Arts, Religion, and Contemporary Culture. So I want to go back to SARC and bring the science back together with religion, because there is no argument there. It's small-minded people want to see a conflict. And inscribed in the chancel of the Second Congregational Church in London is John 17:21, that they may all be one. And human beings, we thrive in community. After the Civil War, the missionaries, both black and white from the north, go south to save the unwashed, because they couldn't possibly be practicing the correct form of Christianity. The women were left out. It became a movement called the Sanctified Church. Cheryl Townsend Gilkes wrote a book about it called If It Wasn't for the Women. And the message is, if it wasn't for the women, there wouldn't be a church. And we have all of these male, we have the male God, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But what we have in Proverbs is wisdom is a she. And I'm going to shut up. That was like way too much. I'm gonna quit babbling. Thank you. You just really lit me up. You just really lit me up. I'm inspired. Thank you.
Thank you for your points about science and religion, because I find nothing gives me more of a sense of wonder and awe than
You
science.
get closer to the mic. I'm having trouble hearing.
Sorry. I said, I'm glad you brought up your points about science and religion and spirituality, because I feel that science does more for me than anything else to really inspire a sense of awe and wonder at the miraculous. You know, it's beyond our comprehension, but that doesn't mean, you know, that the more we understand about it, the more we examine it and you know, categorize it and break it down, the more patterns we see and the more intricacy and the more, I'm not going to say designed by somebody with a slide rule and a protractor working it all out, but there's some kind of intelligence in there. You know, to my mind, mysticism says that that creation is the same as the creator.
Consciousness.
That right, that it's creating itself. Exactly, that the consciousness itself is creating what we experience as reality. But the more we examine it, the more there is to appreciate of the mystery. Ultimately, it's a mystery. We you know, we don't know what really creates the weather patterns or, you know, genetics or anything else. Whatever we want to examine with science, it's not really answering anything. It's just describing it in more detail, which is, as I'm saying, for me, that just enhances my appreciation of the mystery all the more. You know, and mathematics, just how, again, how structured and patterned and intricate and precise it is. You know, since really getting to know more with Bart, my parents were both science majors, but I kind of went my own way. Now I'm seeing that it's not a dichotomy at all. Each one complements the other, and the more we appreciate one, the more we appreciate the other. And I think it should be at the core, especially as Unitarians, of our appreciation of nature, um, the miraculous of creation. You know, it's just so much more structured and intricate than we imagine. You know, but there's things like the Fibonacci sequence everywhere, and the more we look, the more we see, and the more we see, the more we hopefully have an experience of awe and not, I think some people do have a sense of mastery over it, but that's an illusion. It's just not what's, you know, the more we look, the more we should admit we don't understand. And yet we're here and we're thinking about it and we're talking about it, we're learning about it. It's discoverable. It's not just in our consciousness or our minds, because there's something out there that people are seeing. You know, independently coming to the same kind of conclusions. Um, and so I find it more and more awe-inspiring the older I get.
Awe is one of my favorite words. And our daily bread. Um, there's a wonderful little description about, let's see, it's called Celebrating the Wonders of Soil, and how scientists have no explanation for this carbon-rich layer we have on the surface of the world, without which we wouldn't exist. But they know that there's carbon clouds in space, so they assume that as the Earth cooled, that they passed through these carbon clouds and acquired the skin. And in Genesis, you have where God lifted Adam up from the soil and breathed life to him. So we are literally stardust. We are the universe. We are the universe reflecting on itself.
Right. We seem to have the eyes to look back and see what it is. But I don't know what animals see when they look, when a seagull is flying along the water. They seem to be feeling something. They seem to be celebrating it. You know, in the way they move, they seem to be responding to it. And I see animals stop and look at a sunset. So I don't want to say they don't experience any sense of awe or spirituality. I think they may. I think insects very well may, and they're so much more complex than we understand. They seem to be very driven by instinct, but bees are doing these little dances that are drawing maps, is what they think now, that they're telling the other bees where to go and get the honey, where to go and get the nectar to turn into the honey.
It gets even better. Lately, some experience they've connected electrodes to plants and to flowers,
Right.
and the when a flower has pollen in it, I think they put out a positive energy. And after a bee has collected it, the charge changes to a negative, and the bees can sense this. So they know. It blows my mind. It just absolutely blows my mind. Now, one of my sponsees, who was kind of a pagan priest, could see the energy field around plants and around herbs. And in Findhorn, they talk about the devas, and how they would communicate with the devas of the plants, and the plants would tell them what they needed in order and they just growing these incredibly huge vegetables.
Right.
Does-
With their energy.
Bruce, you want to say anything?
No,
Okay.
You're welcome to, if you'd like to. Do you know what Findhorn is?
What?
Have you ever heard of Findhorn? It's a spiritual center in Scotland, I think.
Yes.
Is that right, Bud?
Yes.
Where they just really communed with the plants and nature, and
right.
did all kinds of consciousness work. And they've written several books and published, a lot of their conclusions. But my astrology teacher was really into them, and went there, and she gave me several books on their work.
So where they have in moving forward, what they're working on now is the new story, which is the same thing as Mary Evelyn and John Grimm are working on, the Yale's Forum on Religion and Ecology. The old story isn't working anymore, so we need a new story. And tying that together with Marshall Gantz. Marshall Gantz dropped out of Harvard in 1964 and spent the summer with the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party, and spent the next 15 years with Cesar Chavez in the farm workers movement, and took that and put it on like 8 pages for the Sierra Club, The Power of Story and Social Movement, or Why David Sometimes Wins. I call it evolutionary consciousness because the word doesn't change, the laws of physics don't change, but our understanding of it does, our consciousness does. So I'm calling it evolutionary consciousness,
Right.
which is a group. No one person can ever actually hold all this information. So it takes all of us as a group coming together. And when we come together as a group and we create a common vision, we co-create our future. It's mind-boggling.
What about the folks at, I think it's called Damanhur? I hope I'm saying that right. Do you know anything about them? But
Say, say, say it again.
they're in Italy. It's called, I think it's Damanhur, Damunhur.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Okay, well, they have this thing about uh, uh, creativity, and they're creating these underground caves that are incredible sculptural spaces. That it's all about energy and meditation and practices. Damunhur, Damunhur, I think. Um, and they're working on the thought forms about new kinds of money and things like that. They have their own currency, and it's a community that you can join and live with and raise your family there in this very special kind of community. And they really live for creating the art that they create, most of which is in these underground caverns. Um, and they just create these incredible spaces. But they also
We,
with nature and plants.
you remember Lenzo de Vasto, the community of the Ark in France? So he built an ark, um, and when you read about it in the papers, it sounds kind of bizarre, like really far out there. But this guy was really amazing. He drew a community around him, and they were very active in the peace movement. He spent time with Gandhi um, uh, uh, to the point where he was able to bring Gandhi's principles to France with him, and then was able to get an interview with the Pope. And that's when the Pope, I think it was in the 1970s, when John Paul really came out against nuclear bombs and nuclear warfare. Um, there's a convergence of forces, and there's so many small groups like that, so many villages, and the Carolyn Merchant points out in The Depth of Nature that historically we viewed the Earth as a living organism, and going back to Bacon to 1600, but then it's really became systemic around 200 years ago, where we mechanized it so we could exploit it without hurting our conscience. So we need to focus on the sacred and divine feminine, Mother Nature, left hand of God, moon, water, as opposed to your typical male imperialism that's gotten us into the mess we're in now. The women tend to work horizontally, cooperation, whereas men tend to work vertically, top down. And we need that feminine touch.
Centrality rather than a hierarchy. And
What was the first word?
Centrality. A key figure in a group would be considered central rather than higher.
Oh yeah, the middle of the circle, like the dot in the middle of the sun.
Because that individual's making more connections with more other individuals within the circle. They're central, and that's more important. It's not that they have more power in a power over sense, it's that they have more connections, which is
That's great. There's a great story about that. There's a monk around the year 600 who had there was a lot of dissension and in the monastery. So he has the monks form a circle, and he's in the middle. And he says, picture me as God. You can't get closer to each other. You can't get closer to God without getting closer to each other, and you can't get closer to each other without getting closer to God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same thing you were just saying, the centrality.
Right, right.
Okay, let's call it a night.
Well,
Thank
it's
you.
Morning,
Peace
Bud.
and blessing, and to an eventful. May you live in interesting times.
The recordings are all on YouTube, so you can look them up.
Yep, I've got a list of all of them.
Okay,
it's great to see you in
enjoy.
at least in real time, if
Yep.
not in the
Yeah,
same.
Yep.
it's thank you for putting up with me.
No, our pleasure.
We've
Don't worry.
enjoyed having you very much.
The
As
yeah,
always.
I work with a lot of different groups, and one group likes acceptance, and the other group I can I can tolerate things which are unacceptable, but I can't accept things which are intolerable.
Right.
That sounds like a spin on what's her name, Angela Davis.
Right. Yep. Okay.
Peace out.
Peace.
Peace out.